With human rights, you either accept it in its totality or it means nothing. And I've had a few creeping thoughts over the last few days about human rights due to the identity card debate that's going on right now. I say debate, but it's not a debate. Joyously, the UK population seems to be unanimously saying, fuck this ID card. And that is fantastic to see. Joyous moments are usually very passing. And to this very moment, I found myself very happy that the left and the right, in the traditional senses, and everything in between and beyond, have spoken as one and said, no, we're not going to accept this level of surveillance. We're really not going to tolerate this. We can see where it goes, the inevitable descent into social credit, and being able to control where we can buy things. I think somebody made a brilliant point from the right saying it's only a matter of time before you go into the supermarket and go to the heavily monitored checkout with your steak, and you're informed that your carbon footprint and red meat intake is too high this month and you're refused to purchase. And that kind of sums up that issue with where this would inevitably lead, and where the plan, many of us believe, and where the plan is to take it. The totalitarian tiptoe, as it's so brilliantly described. People are just very selective. Once it starts hurting them on the downward swing from the powers above, they get very upset, and rightly so. And there are so many people, especially on the right at the moment, me who's politically neutral, feels exactly the same, that this is a country that is governed in a two-tier system. People are being very differently treated for bias from all sorts of different angles of the political spectrum. The extreme left seem to get a free pass with their levels of ideas and concepts and policies that are implemented, but the right are more or less universally lambasted and sometimes even criminalised. I think there's about 4,000 people in prison at this present time in the United Kingdom for social media posts where they committed thought and text crimes, and it's all pretty horrendous. I can remember my ex-partner making a brilliant point once that kind of ruffled my feathers at the time, but it always rings in my ears that people only ever talk about freedom of speech when they want to be a cunt, as she so poetically put it. And that is pretty much true, but it does run a hell of a lot deeper these days with the way the world is turning. And the problem being, and I saw this with a completely unrelated situation with big name YouTubers. Those of us who were at the bottom of the pile many years ago were being hit with really absurd rules, and we would get community strikes for absolutely nothing. One classic was an unlisted video that I shared with people with the link of my then pregnant partner, and she was cradling our new family member, which was a pair of kittens. One of them was on her lap and she was on her side, heavily pregnant, and you could see her cleavage. Now, ladies, when they're pregnant, she went from being part of the itty bitty tiddy committee to having a pair of double D's, which if you lay on your side, they tend to mimic the sight of two bald men wrestling in a telephone kiosk. And I was flagged for sexual content. She was completely clothed to the nines, which was odd for her online, and I was punished for it. I got one strike on my account, my YouTube account, and if you get 3, within 6 months you will lose everything you've uploaded, your ability to do so in the future. Your whole YouTube channel is cancelled. And if you were a big name person back in the day, looking at about sort of 2010 to 2015 here, you'd never fall victim of these awful abuses of the flagging system. You know, people used to do something called click bombing as well. They would find somebody who'd been successful in joining the YouTube partner program, and they would sit at home and routinely refresh the page on a person they hated's videos, and it would register an anomaly in the AdSense analytics, and you would lose your ability to make money out of your videos because of, obviously it looked like somebody was trying to harvest money from just, you know, nefarious reasons, repeatedly clicking a video, and thus the advert repeats time and time again. And initially it worked, and people eventually used it as a weapon, but it never worked against the bigger YouTubers, and none of them ever spoke out. None of them ever said, well, life is, well, it teaches us in every sense of the word that if we don't protect the foundations and the roots of any organisation, the rot works from the foundations upwards. And at times it could be very frustrating when you'd get flagged for your heavily pregnant partner showing her cleavage, not intentionally, but it was just there. It's there by default. They're called women, they're called breasts, and everybody has them. And you see people that YouTube were actually actively promoting. I remember the video for Nicki Minaj's Anaconda was very popular at that point in time, and YouTube were plugging it on their main page and really pushing it. And that verges on soft pornography, and it's very frustrating when you see that level of two-tier policing. And it speaks for itself. The larger people never spoke up for the little ones, but eventually the rules that were infesting the grassroots level of small content creators permeated upwards, and the big YouTubers were in absolute outcry, unified as in disgust, and you can't do this to us, it's our income, you've censoring material that's 10 years old that you made money from. Yeah, we've all been there, mate. It's just you never looked downwards and took care of us. I had a video once that I worked out through the quite substantial amount of money. It was a fluke viral video that was in my back catalogue, that I made a lot of money out of it relative to me, my life and my incomes. And YouTube retroactively, this was about 2 or 3 years ago, sent me an email saying you have a strike on your account for adult content. There wasn't any adult content. I just touched on adult subjects, you know. There was nothing, there was no skin, flesh, or even cursing, you know. It was an adult themed video conducted by somebody who has a level of maturity about them. I'm just fucking wonderful if you don't know. And I worked out if I made, let's say, £100 out of this YouTube video over the years, Google AdSense would have made at least double that, because you get a percentage of, you know, the click-through rate of adverts that are placed on your videos, whether you like it or not. It's just pure luck at that point in time whether you were considered worthy of being a partner and could make money out of them. And it was unbelievable to have made Google a very tiny amount of money. One blade of grass and, you know, one drop of water in the ocean, with how big that corporation is. But I'd made them money. I'd made a relatively substantial amount of money out of it, and so had they. Then all of a sudden I was, forced into the position of being their victim when they said, well, that video that we've okayed for 10 years. Now it's of dubious repute, and we're going to take your ability to make money from it away, and we're going to put a strike on your account. And if you have another strike within the next 6 months, that will be 2, and following that 3, and then your channel will be closed down. And I was left thinking, this is just mental. You know, I've got so many videos where I touch on adult themes and everything like that, politics, sex, sexuality, religion, war, all of it. And I thought, if you're going to retroactively implement some kind of punishment system, I'm fucked. And the people at the top, the bigger creators, for some reason they always bypass this kind of stuff, but then it started affecting them, and boy did they speak out. They called it the adpocalypse because their income was being threatened, just like those of us on a regular day-to-day level have our incomes threatened from the moment we wake up in the morning, throughout the night while we're asleep, and then throughout the day. Everything's at risk. What do we have to do? Keep our ear to the ground. And if the shit hits the fan, we have to bite the bullet, draw welfare, and try and rectify the situation. But no, the bigger YouTubers, metaphorically, sat in the foyer of the company that had just fired them, sat on the stairs saying, I'm still going to do the same jobs, can someone just throw money at me? You know, with the passers-by. You know, an official system of earning had been removed from them, and they just sat there begging, doing the same job in the same organisation, metaphorically speaking, but just begging for scraps to be thrown at them. And it was very hard to be sympathetic when they'd let the people at the bottom be treated like shit for years, and then when it came to them, it was something they spoke so loudly about. And the same thing is happening with this universal disapproval of the ID card scheme, the digital ID card scheme, and it is showing a lot of a lack of self-awareness, a lot of two-tier attitudes, and some rank hypocrisy. There are very loud voices, specifically or more or less exclusively from the right wing, saying this is out of line, this shouldn't be allowed. This ID card is going to be a route to social credit, us having our freedom of movement removed. You know, there are so many things that I'm sure most people have looked into or at least heard about because of the explosion of information surrounding this ID card. But people are upset that their banking will be associated with it eventually. Their ability to purchase will be associated with it eventually, just like with electric cars. In theory, if the state didn't want you to be doing certain things, or you're an agent provocateur, let's say, they can cancel your electric car and it will just stop dead on the road and you won't be able to start it. It's controlled from a central database. And there is no reason to believe that we will be treated any different. Say something a bit iffy, anti-government online, and you will find your ability to get online completely held in place and you can't do it. The societal and social problems of a digital ID and where it would inevitably lead speak so loudly, and they're so obvious. But there are people already who are relentlessly monitored. The people who are unfortunate enough, I'm going to talk about people who are disabled and receiving certain state benefits. There is legislation that came in at the beginning of 2025 where people's bank accounts can be relentlessly monitored for fraud. I'm not talking about people who are claiming other benefits. This is just people who are disabled. I've heard a lot of disabled people talking about this. They are being monitored. There are people suffering with, say, chronic, lifelong mental or physical conditions. You imagine somebody who's suffering from anxiety and paranoia, and they know that their every move and everything that they buy and the small amount of pleasure that a small amount of money can potentially give them could end up with a Gestapo interrogation. What are you buying things like this for? You're meant to be sick. This is literally what's happening to people. And the rot in that way is completely celebrated universally by left and right. Yeah, don't let these people defraud the system, even though the system itself from the inside has created more error and fraud than anybody on the outside, and with the benefits that disabled people get. There is this illusion that the left and the right try and paint that it is something where you just go to the doctors, and I've heard a right-wing pundit say this within the last week. You go to the doctors, you tell them you're a little bit unhappy, and they will okay very large government payouts for disability benefit. And the truth of the matter is it's an arduous and stressful experience trying to gain such government support, such state support, and the weight of medical evidence that you have, tangible medical evidence that you have to provide to support such a claim, is overwhelming. It's huge, and recent think tanks have looked into this, and there's about a 1% fraud rate with disability benefits in the United Kingdom. But those people are still having everything that's been feared and now is considered utterly against human rights. And I've heard that mentioned a lot, especially by the right-wing pundits. But it's happening to people within their society already, and their only crime is to be disabled. I see so many misguided people making comments on videos where people mention the disability issue and saying, well, there's so much fraud within the disability benefit system. And I think, well, the proof says that's not the case. And it's just such a shame when people's backup is bigotry and what they've heard from a fellow bigot, playing it off as some kind of fact. It's a problem that we all have in life. As Rimmer said in Red Dwarf, like German tourists, the stupid are everywhere. And for stupid, you can probably exchange that for the word bigot or bigots. But the state is monitoring, observing and controlling, and attempting to change law to actually physically control what people can spend their money on if they're in a position where they're disabled. They were trying to alter the law, the previous government, to make it so people didn't receive money, but they received tokens that they could only pay for certain products in certain places, essential products, I guess. Ignoring the fact that why these disability benefits were put in place in the first place, to cover the excessive costs that come with somebody who's housebound, let's say, and needs help. And sometimes it's not even help that it's on a tangible level from another human being. It's having normal things like going shopping, being forced to have it delivered, that kind of thing, And there's also part of the legislation that says it's also there to give some kind of quality of life, so you can still have pleasure and go out and potentially do things irrespective of your disability. It's there for pleasure as well as practicality, and people are being monitored for fraud that doesn't really exist. Once somebody's got the solid medical evidence behind them, that is something that should not be monitored. It's as simple as that. No one should be being monitored. Everybody should be considered. In fact, the Human Rights Charter after the war said that there's got to be a burden of the state to consider people innocent until proven guilty. And you can't constantly be monitoring people on the proviso that they may commit a crime if there's no evidence prior to that they may be doing so. And that's the problem. People have let the rot set in from the bottom, and now it's not just with the YouTubers, the big ones at the mark of 2015 when the adpocalypse happened. They didn't look after the little people, and indeed they probably cheered, as the left and the right have done, with criminalising disabled people before they've even done anything. It's people who aren't going to do anything, people who aren't doing anything wrong, to be in the position that they're in. And that's the problem. The rot's already there, and it's working upwards, and it was in the ankles and the soul of society, with the people at the bottom of the pile And now it's gone up a few notches and it's hit at least knee level with the pyramid of control and suppression and government and the powerful and the greedy. And people are upset about it. And I say loudly, confidently, and I hope very clearly that if you supported any of the draconian and extremely totalitarian attitudes towards sick people being monitored, even the unemployed being monitored, it is a flagrant abuse of human rights and the Human Rights Charter. It is just terrible to be looking for crime. It's not like the innocent sight of a British bobby on the beat. It is people snooping into areas of society where they are literally just looking for crime. I can remember on many occasions in my life having stopped and spoken to a policeman for various reasons. I'm not going to exaggerate it, it's happened a few times in my life. And they don't instantly think, right, hands against the wall, spread them. They wait and hear what you've got to say. Could you tell me where the local bank is? Yes, sir, it's up there on the left. But below the surface, people are being looked at on approach by the state as being guilty until proven innocent. And that is a horrific state of affairs to be in. And people have let that happen to the people at the bottom of the pile, and now the rot is creeping upwards, and it's hard to find sympathy. I'm very pleased to see that the world, with regards to the confines of the UK and beyond, seems to be pretty much unified in its loathing of the present government. I voted for them and I feel complete and utter embarrassment and shame to admit that. So desperate to rid this country of the prior regime, but I should have stayed at home. There's no one who represents me. There's nothing and nobody who represents me. Not at that level. But yeah, too many people now are being they're potentially looking at the same levels of intrusion on their life, liberty and freedom as the people at the bottom have as standard. And boy, are they fucking angry, and rightly so. But if you let the rot set in at foundation level in any structure, it will inevitably work upwards. And it's just basic logical physics, biology, and especially human nature, that if you don't look after the little people, it's gonna bleed into every aspect of life. Be it crime. I had my house burgled. Yeah, well, the system that has forced people into absolute poverty is making people desperate to not be in that position, and they take opportunistic jabs at the world. You know, there are obviously big exceptions with career criminals, but I know of people on forums that I'm a part of who admit to habitually shoplifting now because that's their only option in life. A system that's forcing people into criminality. I have been a part of pretending to myself that even though I know better, that it's all the same. The marionettes may look different, but the puppet master's identical. Nothing ever changes, it just gets steadily worse. And I feel bad about that, I really do. But one thing that I don't feel bad about, not that this is about me or setting myself above anyone else or anything, but I've been aware through my experience with YouTube, and that alone, that if you in the middle of society, the very comfortable middle of society, don't look after the foundations and the people at the bottom, what is being imposed upon them that you sometimes even applaud will bleed upwards. It's only a matter of time before you're going to find yourself going, but I've done nothing wrong. Why am I being criminalised?